Oh, I thought I did. Now I did. Okay, great. Good job.
Yeah, okay.
So he was a soldier in if he's in yeshiva now, but he was during the war in Gaza. But thank God. Yeah, thank God. Ah, yes. Thank
Is that
you.
your own?
No, she's my third, but our first, she's 21. She's young. First one to get married. So yes, it's
But 18.
everyone in the right time. Everyone in the right time.
Yeah.
We all. Yes, it's very special. On my parents' side, it's the first grandchild to get married, or his first daughter. So yeah, that's yeah, yeah, special, special. Okay, so today I was listening to a podcast on the way in, and it's just funny that when everything sort of all themes sort of collide. Today I want to talk to you about leadership. We are, of course, going to talk about Moshe and leadership. But I think that, when we think I'm thinking a lot about leadership actually at the moment. And if you just look, both in our country and around the world, I think that this is something that we sort of took for granted years ago. There were leaders, and maybe we knew less about them because of social media, and we kind of had a more of a filter. And maybe it's true that because it feels that our leaders, in a way, for the, obviously everyone has their good points and their bad points, their weaknesses, their strengths and their weaknesses. At the same time, we're starting, I think we feel, and we felt in Israel for a long time, and you see this around the world as well, that there is a polarization happening in leadership. And those kind of centrist, sort of moderate leaders their voices are being less heard, and we're hearing more and more leaders who are toward the extremes in some way. And more than that, I think, if you've ever watched the Knesset or yeah.
Don't.
Or I mean, I'm not sure if Parliament is that different. The US doesn't have that as much, that sort of, but you watch the Knesset, if they have a Knesset channel, right? If you don't watch it. It's really quite shocking to see the interactions and how these people who we want to hold up as our leaders, and we want our leaders to be more than just political leaders. We want them to, of course, make sure there's security and safety and that we're strong and protected. And at the same time, we kind of also want moral, righteous leadership. And I think, we're still in a way kind of if it's there, we're not feeling it all the time. And so let's put it that way. And I think I would say this about leaders across the spectrum. So without naming any particular ones in any places. So on that note, I want to think with you about leadership and how Moshe came into leadership. Because in some ways, Moshe was set up. We're going to, it seems so natural to us that he became, because it's so obvious to us, we know the story, he became the leader. And yet, as we go through the story, we begin the story, it's actually surprising that Moshe, in fact, became the leader he was for many reasons. And we're going to see those reasons over the next 2 weeks or so. So let's begin. We're going to, I want to actually start with, I'm going to skip to page 2. So I promised to get back to page 1, but I decided to start with the sources. Okay, warming up, so I'll take off my jacket now. Okay. Source 1, I want to read with you 3 sections. I know you're familiar with this, but I want to read it with you textually. We're about to read 3 stories about Moshe and really, it's the first thing we hear about him other than the fact that he was a baby who was put on the Nile and that Bat Paro found him. Okay. Other than that, we don't hear much about him. And we left last week with, you'll remember, with what Leon Cass terms the conspiracy of the compassionate, the story of all the women who were involved in in saving Moshe, and the women of the Midrash, that the Midrash develop into the Nashim Tzidkaniot, who have, unbelievably everlasting faith in the face of hardship and difficulty, and their ability to believe in the future and to look past today toward tomorrow. So now we're going to turn to what happens next in Moshe's life story. Okay, so you're going to see that there's what we call a lacuna in the text, right? We're missing a lot of years. This happens in a lot of biblical stories. Suddenly, we leap from this character being possibly 3 years old, we don't know exactly, to being 20 or 40 years old. What happened? We don't know what happened to Moshe. There's a lot lacking, a lot of questions. Um, and so the question is, how does he develop? What influences him? Remember, he's going to be growing up in Paro's house, in Paro's palace. Getting the tutors, if you ever watched The Prince of Egypt, obviously we've been a little bit blinded by that, but getting the same tutors as the princes and learning what an Egyptian prince would learn, and becoming strong and becoming confident and learning languages. And okay, how does this person become Moshe, Moshe Hanavi, Moshe Rabbeinu, who leads the Jewish people? Well, what went on there in his upbringing and his development? More than that, I think that the lack of information in the text really opens up a big field for the Midrash to kind of plant ideas and pictures of what Moshe went through. We have a very similar thing in the story of Abraham. Abraham, we hear that he leaves his father's homeland and he leaves with his father, and then suddenly we hear Lech Lecha, right? That God tells him to go, okay? That he and Sarah should leave there where they are and go to Eretz Canaan. And there's a big question. How does Abraham, what was it about him? Why did Hashem choose him? So there's a lot missing in the text. And there the Midrash fills in the text with two famous Midrashim. One that he went and broke all the idols in his father's house. He was the iconoclast. And the other Midrash that he saw a palace aflame, which Rabbi Sachs famously, one of Rabbi Sachs's most well-known drashot, that he saw a palace on fire and asked, how can this palace be on fire and there be no Baal Habayit, no landlord to put it out, which of course was Abraham's philosophical and theological process of discovering monotheism. So the Midrashim fill in a lot of, the Torah leaves a lot open. Now it's nice when the Midrashim fill things in. At the same time, it kind of pins us down to a certain experience for the character. I think partly the Torah, I don't know why, but partly the Torah leaves open these stories because it also leaves a lot of room for us to come into the stories and to think about, where is this story meeting us? What is going on? What was Moshe's experience? And why do we think in the time we live, when we read this story, do we think he became who he became? So with that in mind, we're going to look at our source. Begin with Shemot chapter 2, verse 10. So what happens in verse 10? Vayigdal. Now, as we read, I want you to think about two things. What is some of the language? We do a lot of literary analysis here. What in the language strikes you as interesting, or maybe you have questions about? And how would you characterize Moshe's behavior? Okay. ויגדל הילד ותביאהו לבת פרעה, ויהי לה לבן, ותקרא שמו משה, ותאמר כי מן המים משיתיהו. So remember, we actually talked about this verse last week, the end of it. When the child grew up, she, meaning Miriam, brought the child to Bat Paro, Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. Took him as a son, and she called his name Moshe because I drew him out of the water. We talked about that last part last week. We're not going to talk about that today. But we do hear that he grew up. Miriam brings him to Bat Paro, and she names him. Verse 11. ויהי בימים ההם, ויגדל משה, ויצא אל אחיו, וירא בסבלותם, וירא איש מצרי מכה איש עברי מאחיו. Now, sometime after that, we have no idea how long after, Moshe grew up and he went out to his brethren and he sees their suffering and he sees an Egyptian man hitting a Hebrew man from his brothers. And he looks here and there and he sees there is no man. So he strikes the Mitzri, the Egyptian, and buries him in the sand, kills him and buries him in the sand. I'm going to keep your thoughts. Don't forget what you're going to say about this. We're going to read the next two scenes and then start to build a picture about Moshe. The second scene, Yud Gimel, Vayetze bayom hasheni, v'hina shnei anashim ivrim nitzim, vayomer larasha, lama takera echa. Now, Moshe goes out on the next day, the second day, and sees two people fighting, arguing. Vayomer, And sorry, and he says to, it's interesting, Vayomer LaRasha says to one of them, meaning that he's characterizing them as evil, as offenders. Why are you, they weren't just arguing, they were fist fighting. Why are you fighting with your fellow? Why are you striking your fellow? And then says that anonymous man to Moshe, Vayomer mi samcha leish sar v'shofet aleinu. Okay, who put you in charge as judge to rule over us? Halahargeni ata omer, kasher haragta et hamitri. Are you going to kill me the way you killed that Egyptian yesterday? Vayira Moshe, Vayomer achen noda hadavar. Moshe is fearful and realizes, oh, someone found out, right? Like in today's world, someone got a video and put it on social, right? Somehow this went viral, okay? Um, Scene 3. Moshe runs away. Vayishma paro et hadavar hazeh vayvakesh laharog et Moshe. Vayivrach Moshe mipnei paro. Vayeshev beretz Midian. Vayeshev alav. Okay, wow. So Paro hears now, goes so viral that Paro hears that Moshe had his adoptive grandson has killed someone. And he says, and he puts a decree, right? Sorry?
Bolo.
Yeah, exactly. He says, a fatwa, right? We have to kill Moshe. So Moshe understands if he stays, he'll be executed. So he runs away to Midian. And he dwells there. He sits there on the well, next to the well, by a well. ולכהן מדיין 7 בנות, ותבואנה ותדלנה ותמלאנה את הרהטים להשקות צאן אביהן. So now he's in Midian, and the priest of Midian, who we have not met yet, happens to have 7 daughters. And these 7 daughters have come to draw water from the well and to fill their pitchers, the words blanking me, doesn't matter, their troughs, so that they can feed their tzon, okay, their sheep, their flocks, the father's flocks. Verse Yudzayin, Vayavo haroim vayigarshum vayakam Moshe vayoshi'an vayashketzo etzonam. So the other shepherds come by and they see these weakling girls and they say, "Get out of here!" and they shoo them away and they want the well for themselves. So Moshe sees this scene. He's sitting by the well. He gets up and he redeems. He saves them. Vayoshi'an. And not only that, he brings the water and gives water to the sheep. Yudchet, vatavona el Reuel avihen, vayomer, madua miharten bo hayom. And now we hear that the girls run to their father, who's called Reuel here, and he says, "Why did you come back so soon today? Normally it takes them a long time to lift all that water out of the well and fill the trough and feed give the sheep water." Okay, so what do they answer in verse Yutet? Vatomarna ish mitri hitzilanu miyad haroim, v'gam dalo dalalanu vayash ketaton. Well, there was this Egyptian man sitting at the well, and he saved us from these shepherds who were shooing us away, and he even, did our work for us and gave water to our flocks. Verse Chaf, vayomer el benotav, ve'ayo. So he says to his daughters, "Well, where is he? Who is this guy? Lama zeh azav ten. Et ha'ish kir'ena lo vayochel lachem." So he says, "Why did you leave this man? Call him to us. We'll invite him at least in for brunch. What is this?" Okay. Chaf Aleph. Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish vayiten et tzipora bito lemoshe. Okay, so what happens in verse 21? Moshe consents to stay with the man. He doesn't just stay with brunch. He stays a little longer. And in fact, they make a deal, and one of the daughters, Tzipora, is given to Moshe as wife. Verse Kafbet, and we'll stop here. Vatele ben vayikra et shmo Gershom ki amar ger hayiti beretz nochriya, and they have a child, and they call him Gershom, which means, if you break it down, Ger Sham, I'm a foreigner there, right? Which he named it this because it says, Ki amar ger ha'iti be'eretz nochia. I was a foreigner in a foreign land. I was a stranger in a foreign land. We're going to talk more about Moshe and his children in the next week or two. So I want to go back and okay, so we have these 3 scenes. I've obviously read them in a way that perhaps conveys some of what we're dealing with here. And of course, I'm sure you've read them before and thought about them before, but when you read it again, each time you read it, the literariness of it, the way it's written is so striking. And, I'm sure you notice new things every time. So you tell me, what sense do you have? What questions do you have? And what has been emphasized here? What language strikes you? And what do you notice about Moshe's behavior?
Well, he seemed the identity of Moshe, either as an Egyptian or as a Hebrew, is mixed in this because he's brought up as an Egyptian, goes out an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. The national, well, say nationality of each of in each session is like, where does Moshe belong?
Absolutely. One of the biggest themes in this section, and that's why I wanted to read it all with you, not just with little by little, is what is Moshe's identity? Moshe is on some kind of journey to discover his identity, and he is identityless. We don't know if he knows that he was a Hebrew, okay? But Paro was told, right? Seems to have been told, but we don't know if that was ever revealed to Moshe at this point in the story. And not only that, but there's so much emphasis on the language of he goes out and sees Ish Mitri, everything is anonymous. He sees an Ish Mitri hitting an Ish Ivri, okay? So it's almost like he sees this and he's asking himself, who do I align with in this world? Who I should be aligning with the Mitri um, because he's my people. As far as Moshe knows, that's his people. And at the same time, he's seeing a behavior which is troubling him. And so he suddenly, his heart's going out to the Ivri and he's aligning with the Ivri. And that's a very confusing situation. Yes, Molly.
I disagree with you. I mean, it uses the word achav. So using the word achav means that they consider
Outstanding. The question is, who is it referring to? So we're going to see there's a big debate among the commentaries about who did he go out? Who are his perhaps? Okay, right. Excellent. Right. Right. You could read it
That
as
could have been the
the
shift.
most shot. That could have been the shift. You can read it both ways. It's a little cleaner to read it as he went out to his brothers, the Hebrews, and saw their suffering. However,
could be.
it could be that he went out to his brothers, the Mitrim, and then he saw some suffering, or their suffering, the suffering of the others who he doesn't identify with yet.
I think the last pasuk that you read, I think summarizes his identity.
Absolutely.
So Gary, Eretz Nochiyah, what is Eretz Nochiyah?
Yes.
Is
Yes.
it Mitzrayim? Is it
Wherever he
Midian?
is.
Wherever he is.
Right.
He's-
Not only that, but what do the girls call him to their father? Ish
And
Mitri.
it's mystery.
He's an Ish Mitri. Now that's after he has potentially identified with the Hebrews, right? And it's after he's realized he can't stay in Egypt anymore. He doesn't align with Egypt anymore. Suddenly he's left Egypt. He's thought he's left all that, and now he's Ish Mitri. A very similar thing happens with Ruth in the story of Ruth. Ruth is until she's called, she's always Ruth HaMoabiyah. Even after she's long left Moab, she's always Ruth the Moabite. Only at the very end of the Megillah does she lose that, right? It's part of her own process, part of the process of people around her. The reading makes us sensitive to, it's like here, you live in Israel, you open your mouth, everyone, where are you from? Yes, exactly. No matter how many years I live here, I will never sound like 100% native Israeli, okay? And it makes you understand Moshe's what's the word? Dissonance. Yeah,
The end of his life, he's the
absolutely. Yes, he becomes a man of God. Yeah.
No, in other words, repeat it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and at the end of his life, he is Isha Elohim, a man of God, absolutely. And Moshe Rabbeinu, and he really takes in the Chazal. He takes on a lot of names, a lot of identities. Moshe Hanavi. Yes, very powerful. Okay, so we're gonna see what the commentaries say about who he went out to and who's suffering and what's going on with the Mitri and the Ivri. We also need to note that, as we've seen in the past few chapters, the anonymity continues in our story. No one has a name other than Moshe. It's almost spotlight on Moshe, like if it was a drama, right? It almost doesn't matter who the Mitri is, who the Ivri is. Although we're going to see that the sages tell us very clearly who the Egyptian is and who the Hebrew is, and they develop a whole fantastic story out of this. But really, the spotlight's on Moshe, because here the anonymity of their identities brings to the fore even more. Moshe, who are you? Who are you? Who are you going to choose to be?
What about the 3 or 4 years when he was being raised by his mother? She was definitely hacking him.
Okay, excellent. Big question mark, right? First of all, maybe he went when he was 2 or 3, we don't know, but likely 3. How much longer could he have been, right? Nursing now. That's old enough to have memory of something. You hear these stories of children who in the Holocaust who were like taken to a convent at age 3. And then they remembered the rabbi comes in and says the Shema, and they're able to say the Shema, right? So yeah, big question mark.
Also, he was living in Paro's world for so long, because we don't know how long this period of time is. You would have thought that he would know that there was hardship outside of the palace.
Such a beautiful point. This is a big question as well, because you can live in the palace and you can live in a bubble, right? I mean, look at our world.
Some reason it was on TV. You're watching the Ten Commandments, 1953.
No, no, it's just a big middle.
And it's done well. There's a lot of mistakes, but it's done. But one of the things that the idea that you don't see here in the text is that he was out fighting wars, battles for power, and then he came back to the palace, and Paro was building all this crazy city stuff. These statues and the
Yes.
And then he put him on that. And so it wasn't until
He only came back. Okay, so just our one Perush from the Ten Commandments movie. Sam friends. Is that Moshe, as a lad, was sent off to be with the troops and travel and fight for Egypt and become educated, and then he came back and only then started to see. So he only started to see what was going on, which is a very nice. That makes a lot of sense. That would explain why he was only seeing it now. So yeah, of course.
Why do they say Ish Mitzri? I think we have to be careful even in today's world not to label people. I'm very much into this, and it's hard because we do jump to conclusions
Yes.
and I believe that we have to take away the outside appearance as opposed to what's really going on inside. So I just wanted to make that point because they put a label on him already. They said Ish Mitzri, and so
Yes.
I don't know.
I saw something beautiful about that this week about I'm sure you saw in the news. I don't know. I don't understand the story and I don't even want to know. I just want to leave him in peace. But one of the hostages, Ron Boslovsky, got into some altercation outside a bar with a famous singer and her husband Nasreen. I don't know if you heard about it anyway. So the news media spins everything as, former hostage, Ron Boslovsky, and this altercation. And it was exactly that, what Irene is saying, and I saw someone post, just leave him alone. Like, he doesn't have to, his idea, he's more than being a former hostage. He's going through, he obviously went through tremendous trauma. And I agree with you. I think the text here is highlighting the identity because it's highlighting Moshe trying to figure out, who do I align with? But I absolutely agree with you. For life, it is a life lesson about labels.
Is it possible that they never saw a Hebrew before?
That Moshe never saw you?
No.
No, Midian.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
therefore, how they classify him is not necessarily as opposed to the Ivri, like
Yeah.
Yosef.
Yes, although they clearly identify him as a Mitri. He's dressed. I assume he comes dressed as a Mitri.
Yeah. What you say?
You saw that in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
That's Mitzvah.
I love it. So the first scene makes a lot of sense for Moshe's journey. The second scene gets confusing because what happens here? He goes out. Now, first of all, what's your question? What's your question on the second scene? What strikes you as interesting or bothersome about the second scene? Moshe goes out on the second day and finds 2 Hebrews fighting.
You wouldn't think that he's just killed somebody. He would want to not go out and be in public in case he put himself away somewhere because he's done something really serious.
So thank you, Mindy. You're reminding me we had to say one last thing about the first. Was it moral that Moshe killed the Ish Mitri? Now that's a big question, right? To taking law into your own hands, was that okay? That's something that we need to just think about for a moment and put on the table. Was that proper behavior? And was he impulsive? Should he have done that? At the same time, who else is going to stand up for a Hebrew slave who has no rights? Okay. So very powerful question. And the second thing is, wait a second, vayetze. Now the word vayetze, first of all, we see twice. Vayetze. Both stories start with that he goes out. Something very powerful about this language. First of all, it's saying something about him and his movement. I'm breaking out of my bubble. I'm breaking out of my world, okay? At the same time, you should know that there's a famous instance of this word in Bereshit, which our ears have to go back to that. Ah, there's Vayetze Yaakov. Very good. Beersheba, and there, absolutely, that he is running away. Interesting, there he's running away from his home because of tricking Esav, and his mother sent him away. There too, there's something about there the story is more about, I would say, he's being forced to leave home. Here, Moshe himself is pushing him out. But yes, I think there's something very powerful about that. And the second thing is Vatete Dina, which a few chapters later is the story of Dina who goes out and then is raped by Shem. So there, I think it's very significant because there she is attacked for going out. Okay, so it's, there they say she's a woman, she shouldn't have gone out, to be like she was looking for it, right? A little bit, but
I think it's more of Dina bat Leah. In
Yes.
other words, that Leah was
Yatanit
also
bat
Yatanit.
Yatanit, right?
Right, so that Leah also went
out
out
to
with
greet Yaakov. Yes, although I will say that's the classic commentary. I will say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe has a beautiful, very positive read of Tetzei Dina, which is that, Lubavitch believes strongly in shlichim being couples, and the men are out there just as much as the women. And so Tetzei Dina, she herself was going out to have contact with people around her and be a positive influence in the world. And so, yes, so I think that these Vayete Vatetze's already have a background, have an echo of these previous stories. And so Moshe too, and perhaps you could say, I'm just thinking about this now, is all of those are about, members of the patriarchal and matriarchal family. And so perhaps this is Moshe reconnecting with that part of him. Okay, something in my DNA is telling me to go out and look around me and not stay put. Okay, so now he goes out on the second day, and I love what Mindy said. Why are you going out? You should probably lay low for a couple of days. But the next day he goes out, which makes us say perhaps there's something about Moshe and his call, his feeling of a mission in life, that first of all, he's on a process of discovery of what's going on around him. And second, he has this pull to go out and look around, not to walk around the world with blinders on. It's very easy to walk around our world with blinders on, and not think about what's going on around the world. Personally, I feel, I know it has tremendous ramifications for us here in Israel, but besides that, I'm waiting and waiting. We have not had, you're hearing these random tricklings of information about what happened in Iran, but like, it could be anywhere from 3,000 to, I don't know, the numbers were insane. 20,000 people killed. There was something about possibly some chemical weaponry. I mean, I don't know if it was true, but what happened there? And should we just, okay, close our eyes and move on with life as it's normal? Or should we be thinking, whoa, like what happened there? And I understand we're in a process of waiting and seeing, but it's a message about how we want to think about, how we want to live in this world. It's very easy not to look around, right? I grew up in New York and Manhattan, where I didn't grow up in Manhattan, but I spent time in Manhattan, and it's very easy to walk around and not see the homeless man on the street, on the corner. It's very easy. Now that I've lived away from that for so long, when I go back to places where I see it, it hits you. It hits you, So Moshe seems to be able to rise above this natural tendency. And so he goes out, and this time he sees Shnei Anashim Ivrim Nitzim, two Hebrews fighting. Nitzim is an unusual word in Torah, and we're going to talk about it coming up next week, hopefully. And one of them is already labeled, speaking of labels, a Rasha, okay? And Moshe gets involved. It's such a fascinating, again, Moshe could have easily chosen in all of these cases to walk by, to move on, okay? And to not get involved. And here, the story is saying each time, again and again, Moshe doesn't remain a bystander. He doesn't stay on the side. He jumps into a situation and gets involved. Okay.
He went out specifically to get involved. It's not that he was walking by and could have ignored it.
Yes, I think that's right. I think that's right. It's not obvious, but I think that's right, 100%. And he has something in him that we ask ourselves when we look at leaders in the world, right? We just had Martin Luther King Day, right? Mm-hmm. How did he become the leader he became? And, leaders like Ben Gurion, or, people who, we have tremendous Elie Wiesel, right? How did these people become who they became? It certainly was their life experience, but it was also them meeting their life experience and then developing into who they became. And I think that's the story of Moshe. So we see him in these very early, now he hasn't even been called by Hashem to lead yet. And we're going to see when he calls by Hashem to lead, he is the most reluctant leader in the beginning. And yet we see the seeds of leadership are already here. The third scene, okay, Vayishma Paro, okay, Paro hears, and then Moshe has to run away. Here, Moshe's story does parallel Yaakov's, which is very interesting. He has to run away from where he lives to survive. And where he goes is where he finds his family, his shidduch and his children. And then he has a big question when he gets there. Is he going to stay in Midian for the rest of his life? He just discovered this alliance with the Hebrews, but yet he settles in Midian and happily could stay there forever. We'll talk about that more next week. But in any case, when he gets there, he doesn't let go of who he is as a leader. We see here, okay. Now we don't know, again, we're going to talk more also about the priest of Midian and all of that, and who everyone is anonymous. Everyone is anonymous. The two Hebrews are anonymous until next week. Next week, I'll give them identities. But they're not all this anonymity. It's rampant throughout the story of Moshe. And it both highlights who Moshe is and how he rises above everything around him, and also keeps us questioning and keeps the story kind of, relevant in every generation.
Yeah, but Karen Ra'ul,
Well.
the Midianite priest is named.
He is named.
He is one of the
Okay.
because he will feature later
Beautiful.
on.
Beautiful.
But he is given a name here, and then also the person he marries, Zipporah as well. They're both given names.
Yes.
But everyone else has not been given.
Exactly. Any thoughts on why that is? Yeah, go on.
No,
But you can add a question. Yeah.
They didn't, the E.4 didn't bring him home. Like, it's different than Rivka, like.
Beautiful. The stories are absolutely similar when Eliezer goes to visit Rivka. And Rivka, absolutely. First of all, he sees her. He's just watching and sees how she at this young, strong age of 3 is feeding the camels with and everything. And then she takes care of him. She offers him. She gives him. She is the second generation Avraham, right? Avraham 2G. She does Hachnasat Orchim. Absolutely. The girls. Now, who is the one who is like Avraham? Reuel. He gets a name, I believe, because very strongly here. We'll see. We'll also talk about Yitro as we go on, but he gets a name because he may be, now I think it's very powerful also. This story is saying a lot about, it doesn't just leave us in a world in which the moral ones are the Hebrews and the immoral ones are the non-Jews. We have a beautiful mix in these stories of moral Jews and moral other peoples. And so, and not only that, we also have evil. We have offended Jews. Okay. So again, the story is calling on us as readers and saying, don't assume that every Jew is pure and good, and don't assume that every non-Jew is pure evil. And it's a very important reminder in our world where we sometimes, in particular now, feel alienated by a lot of the world around us. Remember, there are friends and there are foes. And so I think Reuel gets a big shout out here, gets a name because of his actions. His actions remind us of Abraham. They say, what? Bring him home. Bring him home. Hachnasat orchim. Okay, this is how we behave. This is the right way to be. And we'll see that he goes on to be, Yitro has something like 7 names in Torah, which is interesting. And there's a lot to say about Yitro and how he certainly helps Moshe. And his story continues. His and Moshe's relationship continues to grow throughout the narrative. Yeah, of course.
Nina, when you were saying about that they didn't do anything, they were totally passive. They didn't go over and saying, like, when the Ro'im were bothering them, it was Moshe seeing what was happening. Like by Eliezer and Rivka,
Yes,
there was something going on.
He was
Or
super
even
active,
Yaakov
yeah.
and Rachel at the Be'er, there was an interaction between them. Here, there was no interaction between the girls and Moshe, which was daughters of Moshe. He saw something and did it. So when they came home, he says, well, where is he? He goes, no, I don't know, this guy, this anonymous guy was there. So
Yes.
I think that
This
also
Egyptian
that
guy,
they were
this
totally.
Egyptian guy.
I mean, even when Yitro gave Tzipporah,
Right.
you know, there was no involvement. You know, does she want to go, or is her approval or anything like that? It was being
I
sent.
think maybe Itro, he saw that he was a special man.
Ah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing.
Because
Yes, first of all, Hakarat Hatov. I didn't want to cut you off. Go on, please.
no, because I imagine the men of this of the area were not like that. Except water.
Very good point.
Fantastic. So Yitro Ruel notices something about when he hears about this man, he says, wow, this is not a regular man. This is someone unique and special. He was sitting by the well. He could have closed his eyes to the situation. But what is the language? The language is so powerful. Vayakam Moshe Vayoshian. He stood up and saved them. Moshiach. He is Moshe the Moshiach. Okay. And that is very powerful in the text. And Vayash Getzonam, he gives water to the tzon. He gives them to drink. This is, again, a very Abraham-like, Rivka-like act. Okay, so when he hears this about Moshe, he could have also just sent the Roim away. He didn't have to go out of his way to do the girls' work for them and take care. He's helping the girls and he's taking care of the sheep. We're going to see that Moshe is also the ultimate, the shepherd par excellence. We're going to hear about that next week too. And so, which of course, all of these stories are not just stories, they're stories about how step by step Hashem watched and saw this is going to be, Hashem knew, but he came into his place as leader. He was
These
going,
tests.
yafeh, beautiful, right? Like Abraham. I don't know if there's 10. It's an interesting question, but certainly Nisyonot to show that he is Moshe. Absolutely beautiful. There's something else I wanted to point out here. Oh, we also don't know, Reuel is called Kohen Midian. That's something that we'll look into later. What did it mean that he was the priest of Midian? Was he like, a religious figure, a political figure? These were question marks, which we'll leave open for now. And Tzipporah, the name Tzipporah, it's also the other person who gets named is Moshe's son. So we have these people who are going to become key players in Moshe's life, but they haven't yet. There isn't anything yet that they've stood out for. So again, we see three stories. Sometimes it is about a story of oppressor, right? Oppressor and victim, and Moshe coming and saving the victim, the real victim from the real oppressor. And then he sees two Ivrim. So here he could have had a moment of hesitation and said, if he has discovered these are his brothers with one, let's say, go according to the reading that he knows he's a Hebrew, he could have said, hey, these are my two brothers. I'm not going to get involved. This isn't my fight now. But they are two. He takes a stand. And then when he's in this totally foreign place, in a place where he has no status, he doesn't yet know the lay of the land, he still jumps in and acts before. It's Naseh v'nishma. He acts with morality. He has this keen moral compass, which just seems to be naturally within him.
Do you think that's from his mother as well?
Well, it's a good question.
And which mother?
His adopted mother, beautiful. Something about it all, yeah, I think that's beautiful. It's literally the perfect combination of what they call whether it's nature or nurture, right? He has the nature. He comes from Mishpachat Levi. We know that his sister is a moral figure and a protective figure, and saves him. She saves Moshe, together with Bat Paro, and so he gets something from his DNA naturally and something from the learned behavior. Absolutely beautiful reading.
The other thing that occurs to me is that typically when you think about a leader, you would think about somebody who fights for his position. In other words, I did something wrong, but I'm going to explain why I did it wrong. So the minute that Paro finds out what he did, he runs away. So isn't that a little bit counterintuitive to leadership?
I think he must have known that this was not a situation where he had choice, right? Like Paro's a dictator. We see how dictators act in our world, unfortunately. And I don't think it was a situation where Moshe felt that he could explain, he could. That's my sense of the reading. He said, okay, I'm looking at the situation. I know I have no chance. I have to run. maybe you can argue differently, but I get the sense that
But
that's
he's
what
also
happened.
still in his very early stages of maturity.
Mhm.
So he probably wasn't ready to take that on yet. He
Mhm.
was still,
That's right.
it was still early on in his
Absolutely.
life.
He's still figuring out who he is and how this is. And yes, must have been very complex. So I want to take us back to page 1 for a moment. So we jumped ahead to Moshe as a teenager slash young adult or adult already. But I want to say that it's very interesting that one of the things that stands out about Moshe is that he was able to lead partly because he came from the outside. If he had grown up as a slave, we saw the way the slaves acted in Egypt. For the most part, they're like one bundle of they don't have a lot of voice agency. Okay, so if someone's going to be a leader to redeem an entire nation, in all likelihood they're not going to grow up as a slave. Okay, and more than that, we see that he had to be somehow in Paro's palace to give him certain skills for what he would need to be later on in life. Now, interesting when you think about ancient literature outside of Tanakh, outside of Judaism, ancient literature through modern literature. This is a theme in books, in stories about heroes, about leaders, that many of them have the experience of being an orphan of some sort. He wasn't exactly an orphan, but he may not have known about his birth family. And certainly about this idea of what's called an abandoned hero. And so there's a big question, which gets explored. How much is the Moshe story in Torah just the same generic literary story we see throughout a lot of stories of a hero who emerges from a difficult situation? They tried to abandon him, but he came back and lead. Does any stories come to mind? Either from Oh, beautiful. So we have this going back to, we said Harry Potter, going back to ancient times. There's certain Greek myths that have this idea. Anyone who has been to Rome and heard the story of the founding of Rome, which is the twins, Remus and Romulus, they were left somewhere to die.
The foxes.
And right, and the fox raised the fox or the wolves, I can't remember.
Foxes or wolves, one of them.
Some animal saved them, and that's how they grew to become the founders of Rome. So, and you have this story often that there's a child who this family tries to get rid of for political reasons or something. And I looked up on ChatGPT. I tried to find some other stories. Cinderella, excellent. King David. Very interesting. Well, yeah, so they didn't know there. That's it. We'd have to think about that one. I have to think about them. Esther, certainly. Joseph, right? There's some of that. But we're going to see these stories. The stories in Torah do have these similarities, but they're also different. And that's the point I want to make.
I think of Gidon.
Remind me? Gidon?
Gidon and his brothers, they rejected him.
He's
And then
rejected.
afterwards, he's rejected.
Right.
And then he's
beautiful.
I mean, and then like, why are you coming to me? You guys didn't, or is it
Exactly.
Yiftach? It was
Yeah.
also Yiftach.
Okay, I have
was
to look
kicked
back. I
out.
don't remember.
Okay, one
I
of
haven't
them
looked at Shoftim
is
in a while.
Ben Zonah or something like that.
Right,
Was it
right.
Yiftach or Gidon?
I think it might have been Gidon. I'm trying to remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Yiftach. Okay, we'll have a look.
But the idea is that he was rejected by the clansmen, his brothers and his clansmen,
Yes.
and then God saying, "Okay, you're gonna be the leader." He goes,
They're not
or
going
they
to want
came-
me, right?
Right. Yiftach was, wait, you rejected me.
Mhm.
Type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Somehow rejected and then overcoming that. Yeah, there's Superman has to leave his planet, right? We have a lot of these different kinds of stories, okay? And Harry Potter is a great one. So there are similarities between these myths, these stories, this genre of literature and Moshe, and yet there's differences, and that's what I want to talk about because the Torah is not just another myth and another story. The Torah is divine and giving us a message. And so Nachum Sarna, who was a great scholar of Tanakh, writes, and he has this book exploring Exodus, and he says as follows. He asks the question, is Moshe the typical abandoned hero myth? Because there are many scholars who just say, it's just another, abandoned hero myth. Says Nachum Sarna, the account of the birth of Moshe as told in Exodus has often been compared to a well-known class of legends that has as its subject the birth of a national hero and in which the motif of the abandoned child repeatedly occurs. These legends concern both mythology and folklore. Hercules was abandoned by his mother Alcmene. Oedipus, who became king of Thebes, was exposed on a mountain. Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, were put in a chest and cast into the Tiber. Cyrus, founder of the Persian Empire, was ordered by his royal grandfather to be left to die on a mountain. The examples could be multiplied. The motif appears in quite unrelated cultures. What has most attracted the attention of biblical scholars is the Mesopotamian version known today as the Legend of Sargon. Legend of Sargon was also an ancient Near Eastern story where the mother was a high priestess and they had to hide him for some reason. And he was also in a basket on a river. There were many parallels with Moshe, but there he comes back. Now here's the really big difference. He comes back and he becomes the inheritor, the what's the word? He takes on the family royalty in the end. Moshe is different, okay? How is Moshe different? He comes from might be a Levite Jewish family with status, but it's not status in a political way. And then he goes to the palace of Pharaoh, where he could just become the prince of Egypt, right? And the next Pharaoh. And yet, this is what's astounding about Moshe. He, in a way, it's the abandoned hero myth turned upside down because he rejects that. He rejects that call to the, to the typical hierarchical leadership model. That's not what he's looking for. He's not looking to be the next Pharaoh. He has something in him that drives towards something else. And so says Sarna, the supposed close affinities between these folkloristic composition and our Exodus narrative are fanciful. In fact, the story of Moshe's birth departs from the legend of Sargon and from the genre in general in so many significant respects that one almost gets the impression of a conscious attempt on the part of the biblical narrator, aka God, to disassociate this narrative from the features otherwise characteristic of the founding hero motif. So Sarna argues strongly the Moshe story, it's playing with us. It's playing with what is a known genre of the abandoned hero, which a lot of cultures have, and saying in the end, the abandoned hero is not going to be a great king, a great materialistic king who conquers, right? He's not going, that's not the story here. The story here is he's going to be a moral leader who redeems his people, and he's going to leave that world of the hierarchy and the kingship. That's not what he's trying to do here. I also thought about anyone who likes the musical Hamilton, and everyone's seen it, right? So my kids are obsessed and they know all the words to the song. So when I was thinking about this, I won't read the whole thing, but famously one of the first songs, I think it's the first song in the musical is, sorry? Oh, no, I'm not a singer. If my son was here, it's also rapping. It's more rapping than singing. How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? Okay, and so you can go on to read the words on your own. I won't waste time in the shir on that now, but the idea of, and then in the end, my name is Alexander Hamilton, and there's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait. Just you wait. And the song asks, what's your name, man? Like who, right? Who are you? Who are you going to be? And it's not just, I want everyone to know my name. It's that I want to, right? Hamilton was one of the major founding fathers of American democracy. And he had this mission in life and was prolific in writing up many of the important parts of that democracy. And so that's what, also a complicated character. So we won't not the exact comparison to Moshe, but this idea of a lot of times the hero and in our stories, and a lot of times our leaders go through certain experiences that are so formative that it impacts who they are. And that is what Shemot chapter 2 is for Moshe. Shemot chapter 2 is Moshe's formative, obviously also having this Jewish mother and this Bat Paro mother and all of this together makes him become who he becomes.
It also makes him, he was unique, okay? So the point that always bothers me about this is, were there no other Jewish Israelite mothers who tried to save their children? Was she the only one who put him in a basket on the Nile to try to not have him be murdered?
Yes.
As a baby? Miriam, but the difference is that this is a unique situation, that there was somebody who followed where he went and managed him to survive.
Absolutely.
But I can't believe nobody else tried.
There's a Perush, I can't remember who it is, that there were many babies put on the Nile, in baskets, and that this was just divine providence, that it was Moshe. Hashem knew.
I think
who
a
Moshe would be.
women tried to protect their
Yeah.
children because they hid them away and they
Exactly.
kept them quiet and
Absolutely.
they hid them.
It makes him very unique because
Right.
he was followed.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. So now let's try and do a little bit of an analysis of what's going on here. So we'll begin with Leon Cass and his book on Exodus, Founding God's Nation, and Source 4. And he tries to fill in a little bit more of what's going on in our story. He says, saved from the Nile, Moses enters Pharaoh's house at the time he is weaned, likely no later than age 3. So he's guessing that Moshe left his mother when he was 3. As the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, in the immediate sequel, we are told of certain incidents that take place years later, when Moshe, then a grown man, emerges from the palace, leaving the society of women and children to enter the world of men. From the point of view of the unfolding saga of how Moses, the pitiable Hebrew child, became Moses the Redeemer, the text seems to imply that nothing more needs to be known. Yet the inquisitive reader surely wonders about Moshe's boyhood as a prince, or at least as a noble, in the palace, and wonders too about the reason for the book's silence on the subject. So it's interesting. Leon Cass really puts his finger on this, that there were probably about 20, maybe more years that, now if he was out of the country, that's one reading, but if he was in the palace for 20 years, what's going on there? What's he doing? Who's he becoming? Why is the Torah not telling us about it? Maybe it's insignificant. He didn't have his aha moment yet. And yet it's worth noting that there's a real lack, just so we understand how much time has gone by there. Okay, Nachum Sarna says, I'm going to skip Nachum Sarna. I'm going to go to Rashi. Okay, Rashi brings up an important point which we didn't mention. Now, you might not have noticed this, but in the section 1 in source 3, you don't have to look, I'll just read it to you. The verses repeat themselves in a way. They say, Vayigdal hayeled, the child grew, and so Miriam brought him to Bat Paro, etc., etc. And then it says in the next verse, Vayhi bayimim hayam vayigdal Moshe. And in those days, Moshe grew. Okay? So in 2 verses, one right after the other, it says, Vayigdal Moshe. He grew up. Why does it tell us twice he grew up? If you grew up, how many times are you going to grow up? Right? Okay. So what does it mean? What's happening? So Rashi gives us an explanation. He says something clever based on the Midrash. V'yigdal Moshe, v'lo kvar katav v'yigdal hayeled. But we already know that he grew up. Says Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Elai, harishon lekoma v'hasheni legdula. Sheminahu paro el beita. Well, something happened. The first one is v'yigdal Moshe, v'yigdal hayeled. He grew up. He became an adult. Okay? The second reading is it was in status. Something in his status changed. And in his status changing, he suddenly came into a new role and had to think about, well, if I'm taking on responsibility, who do I want to be? What do I want to be? He suddenly had a moment of that on his shoulders of, okay, so what's going on around me? Okay, so Paro had appointed him to take charge, to be the Prince of Egypt. And so he suddenly had to look around, well, what's going on in Egypt? And that's when he started to discover, which is interesting. The Midrash gives us actual age. It guesses his age. And interestingly, it says in Shemot Rabbah, source 7, it was in those days Moses grew. Moses was 20 years old at that time, and some say 40 years old. Okay, so that when he went out and saw the Mish Mitri and the Ish Ivri, he was either 20 or 40. Moshe grew. Doesn't everyone grow? Rather, it is telling you that he grew in an atypical manner. He went out to his brethren. This righteous one went out twice, and the Holy One, blessed be he, wrote them one after the other. He went out on the second day. These are 2. Meaning, the Midrash is saying there's something noteworthy about the fact that he grew up, and then he grew up, something changed within him. Okay, he didn't physically grow the second time. He grew psychologically, he grew emotionally, he grew in his identity. It's a different reading of Vayigdal, okay? He became the person he was meant to be. He might have physically, you think about young, I don't know if any of you, like young boys as they grow up, right? They have their bar mitzvah and they're told, okay, now you're a man. But when are they really a man? When they start to become more mature, independent, take on responsibility, and you see them becoming people, girls and boys, right? Sorry?
Rebelling.
Yes. Differentiating, as we say, right? So now we have to understand who, I want to answer this question that we touched on of who were his brethren, because we had that open question. The Midrash says he saw their burdens. What is he saw? He would see their burdens and cry and say, woe is me, would that I could die for you. There is no labor more arduous than labor with mortar, okay? Not only that, says the Midrash, he would shoulder the burdens and help each and every one of them. He would go out, which fits with the reading of the girls from Midian, that in Egypt, he would see the slaves suffering and he would go and help them with their work. How radical of a Midrash, right? He stepped in and helped them. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, says he saw a large burden on a small man and a small burden on a large man, the burden of a man on a woman and the burden of a woman on a man, the burden of an elderly man on a lad and the burden of a lad of an elderly man. He would leave his royal guard and would arrange their burdens, feigning as though he was helping Paro. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, "You left your affairs and went to observe the Israelites' suffering, and you treated them in a brotherly manner. I will leave the upper and lower worlds to speak with you." Okay, so unbelievable. And it makes you think about, we're going to meet in a moment Moshe and Midian. We're going to hear about how he was a shepherd next week and how he tended so carefully for the flocks, each and every flock. So when he lost one sheep, says the Midrash, that was when he chased after one lone sheep. That's when Hashem came to him in the burning bush. This Midrash is picking up on that biblical story. It's embellishing that. It's embellishing his character based on that and saying, yes, this is what Moshe was doing. He wasn't just seeing their suffering. He was actively manipulating, playing games because he had to protect his status. He couldn't just reveal himself as sympathetic to the slaves. So he would make their lives easier one by one. He would notice each and everyone's burden and what was too much. Rashi says very clearly, whose suffering is he seeing? The suffering of his brothers, his Israelite brothers, okay? Says Rashi in source 8, he set his eyes and mind to share in their distress. He goes out, Vayar el Echav, he knows these are his brothers, the Hebrews, at this point in the story, says Rashi. Ibn Ezra says no. Ibn Ezra disagrees with Rashi in source 9 and says that he went out unto his brethren. Remember, he went out to his Echav, who are his brethren, says Ibn Ezra, the Egyptians, okay? For he was in the king's palace. One of his brethren means one's family, okay? And by the way, says Ibn Ezra, this makes sense because otherwise it would be redundant. Why would it say he went out to his brothers and then also mention the Ish Ivri, okay? So again, take it or leave it. Ibn Ezra feels the more plain sense reading of the text is that he went out to his brothers, he went out to be with the Egyptians, but then suddenly he noticed something off. Okay. Okay, I see we're running out of time. I want to read with you Nechama Leibovitz, and then I'm going to share with you to watch on your own a beautiful piece from Rabbi Sachs, a beautiful video about Moshe and leadership, since we probably won't have time today. So Nechama Leibovitz also notes this about Moshe, notes these elements of Moshe, and here's her summary of how he became the savior of Israel. Divine providence foresaw that the Savior of Israel would hail from a foreign environment. She explains why he had to grow up this way. Steeped in idolatry and would be educated in Egyptian lore, divorced from his people and their tradition. This phenomenon is not unusual in Jewish history. Indeed, Ibn Ezra dwells on this point in his commentary to the Pentateuch. This commentator regards it as providential that Moshe should have originated from just such an environment of royalty and distinction. His superior education eminently fitted him for the task of leadership. At a time when his brethren were slaves and suffered from an inbred slave mentality, Moshe was free from all this. His princely upbringing gave him the courage to slay the Egyptian male treater of his brethren, to come to the rescue of the daughters of Midian, wronged by the violence of the shepherds. Ibn Ezra added that had he grown up amongst his own people, they would have had no respect for him and would have considered him as just another Jew. So very powerful.
That's mentality, yeah.
Yeah, it explains why it was so crucial that Hashem had Bat Paro see him on the Nile. He had to grow up this way in order to become the Moshiach. This is very similar to the Esther story, right? And to the Yosef story. Something about their life experience they had to sacrifice a lot of how they lived and who they were to become the savior of the Jewish people at that moment. A very powerful point to think about for our times. Okay, so I'm going to send Esty. Is it okay if I send you this link?
Absolutely. That'd be
Amazing.
great. I'll put it on.
Actually, same model. Like always, best external education, Cambridge. He, and a lot of the European sort of they all had very, very strong secular
Yes.
education.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
which allowed them to withstand
Yes.
the
Even the
even the
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, and that they could combine, you know,
Yeah.
that with their Torah.
Absolutely.
You know,
We
I
don't
think-
have a lot of rabbis like that
Yeah,
today. Yeah.
I mean, go back to Torah 4 and
Yes.
Torah Derech Eretz. You know that
Exactly.
Derech Eretz is
So-
going around. you know?
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
the
So you're
same
sending
thing,
me that thing?
Yeah, I'm sending it right now. I
Yeah,
actually
stop.
think rabbis
So,
today.
what do we do? We just press.
You said,
Hey,
wait, Carol, can you
Carol,
stop?
yeah,
Yeah, stop. How do we do it? Just press
Step.
record,
Yeah,
click on recording and stop, or you just go down
Yeah,
here.
either one.
There,
Stop.
go pause, and that pauses it.
No, it's gonna stop and then it says you want to show you want to start.
Like, you
Stop recording.
it, stop.
Yes.
It's- Ah,